Okay,
All right, we good to go?
we're good to go. We're off
Good
and running.
evening, everybody. My name is Gary Meyer. Thank you for coming. I hope that the newsletter that you got this afternoon and that is also available on the OMC website will be useful after tonight's lecture. There's a lot of information in there that I think might be much more interesting after Dave's finished with his presentation. So I hope you have time to go and spend a little bit of energy looking at it. I'd like Byron Walker to tell us about a very special lecture that we have coming up later in the year, but that he has confirmed and we're quite excited about. Nobody else knows. It's the first time anybody knows about it outside of the board.
You ready?
Yep.
Okay, we're very fortunate to have a special lecture for our September meeting. We've booked Mike Caveney to lecture. Mike Caveney is a great storyteller. He's been studying an illusion called sawing a woman in half for about 50 years. So he's finally ready to do a lecture and come out with a book on the subject. It's a fascinating story, far better than you expect. You go into posters on the subject, rivalries, the actual origin. Everybody thinks that Selbit invented it about 1920s, but actually he has a poster from 1873 showing it goes back that far. And he talks about the rivalry between Golden and Selbit and on, how it was exposed in the media. And it's a fascinating story. And I know you'll all enjoy it because Mike is a terrific storyteller. So I look forward to the September meeting, first Tuesday of September, September 7th. So tune in then. Don't forget.
Thank you. Okay. I'd like to introduce our special guest tonight. David Hirada has been doing magic ever since he got that Houdini magic kit for his 7th birthday. Continued throughout high school. And in fact, in the newsletter, there's a picture of him, recent picture, but with a bunch of the magic books and tricks that he did as a kid. And he talks a little bit about some of his favorite early effects. He went to Drew University where he got his BA and then got a master's in arts at Brown University. He's been a regular performer at the California Magic Dinner Theater in Martinez and has done the usual range of gigs in various banquet rooms, restaurants, living rooms, and backyards around the Bay Area. His theatrical magic show, A Box Without a Bottom, ran initially at the San Diego Fringe Festival, the Fog City Magic Festival, and then had a successful 3-month run at the Marsh Arts Center in Berkeley. And I hope some of you saw that performance. It was just fantastic. It was up close and personal, but with so much that we need to know about history that we're going to learn some about tonight, as well as seeing some great magic. He's the owner of Things Impossible, which he started in 2006, where you can arrange to have him do magic for events. And he's the director of artistic relations at the Marsh. So David, I'm going to let you take it from there.
All right, thanks, Gary. Okay, looks like we're good. So when Gary talked to me about doing this, it was kind of in the context of Asian American Pacific Island Awareness Month, and we're one day late, but I approached this lecture kind of in that vein. And so it only occurred to me this morning, it's like a good lecture has a snappy title, and I hadn't thought of one. It could be my take on Japanese magic, but then kind of out of nowhere, I thought, well, if I was going to have a sort of slightly offbeat, mysterious title to this lecture, it would be Necessity is the Mother of Invention, and which is a theme which will come up here and there in sort of interesting ways. So I'm going to start with a little bit of digital show and tell, talking a little bit about when it comes to Asian magic, really what I know best is Japan, the magic of Japan, and Japanese Americans in magic, which was the crux of my theatrical show. I've done a fair amount of research on it. I don't claim to be a historical expert. I would say that the research I've done probably approaches something midway between an undergraduate honors thesis and a master's thesis, somewhere in there. But there are many who know this stuff better than I do. But I'm going to start by showing you this little relic from 1866. This is actually the first Japanese passport to be issued to a common Japanese citizen in over 220 years at the time. You may know that Japan had been closed off from the rest of the world since about 1620. And then in 1866, the government began issuing actual passports because of the visit of Commodore Matthew Perry of the US Navy in 1853. The world's first example, or most notorious example, maybe at the time, of gunboat diplomacy, where the Japanese were persuaded at gunpoint to open up to the West. And so after signing the Treaty of Kanagawa, the country began to open up. And this is the passport that was first passport that was issued. And I'm trying to get, there we go. And this belonged to a magician, the Japanese magician Namigoro Sumidegawa, who became part of a troupe, Risley's Japanese Imperial Troupe. It was the project of an American acrobat, circus performer, and producer, Robert Risley Carlyle, who was known as Professor Risley. And he formed this troupe of Japanese performers and brought them to the United States and Europe. Now, these people, the Imperial Japanese troupe was a really big deal. I discovered them in a historical paper called Paper Butterflies, Japanese Acrobats in Mid-19th Century New England, which is a really interesting piece of work, and I'll talk about that a little more. But about the Risley troupe, they were a huge, huge deal. They had performed for two American presidents. They were in all the papers. This is a poster here on the left, a performance for the Prince and Princess of Wales when they got over to Europe. On the right is an illustration of the show in Harper's Weekly Illustrated, which for the time, that's really the equivalent. That's about as big media coverage as you're gonna get. There was no TV, no movies even. Harper's Illustrated meant you had made it. And so this illustration gives you an idea of the scope of the show. It was really kind of a Japanese vaudeville show. There were acrobats. There was the magician Namigoro. This is him performing the butterfly trick. This, I'm guessing, might be some version of Snowstorm in China. So this gives you an idea of the show as a whole. And like I said, they were a huge, huge deal. I'm gonna come back to you on camera. The Kristen Moon article that I read, which introduced me to the importance of these Japanese performers, was in this book. It's kind of a historical textbook, and it's priced accordingly, so I was lucky to get a copy. But she makes the point that for Americans in the 1860s, you were never going to see a Japanese person, except for these troops that went on stage. Before then, the Japanese were this distant, mysterious, exotic people, and they still were, really, for many decades. But the ability to see them in person on stage, this was kind of the introduction for the great American masses. And it really excited me, this idea that, as I say in the show, that for many, many, many Americans in this time, in the Victorian age, the first Japanese face they may have seen could well have been that of a magician. The story of the Risley troupe, of which Namigoro Sumidegawa was a member, is covered really beautifully in this book by a local Bay Area author, Frederick Schott, Professor Risley and the Imperial Japanese Troupe. It's a really fun book. It's about a third of it is about Risley himself, who was an amazing circus performer at the time, and then it's about the troupe itself. And again, it's the acrobats, the jugglers, and Namigoro the magician is a relatively minor character in this great cast of characters, but the book is a lot of fun. And Fred was also very generous in sharing a lot of historical information with me. So every lecture is kind of, or every lecture, good lecture, I think, is something of a story. So I wanted to introduce this story of Namigoro Sumidegawa and the Imperial Japanese Troupe. And I want to introduce you to another magician. And this is Soto Tsunetaro, this photo taken around 1898. And in the historical sources of American magic, he was basically listed as the first headlining Japanese magician to show Japanese magic in America. One of the main sources was Bart Whaley's Who's Who in Magic, published in 1990, and then a 1940s French history of magic. These things were compiled from press clippings and posters, sort of tracking who was on stage, what kind of performers. If you go into back issues of like the Sphinx, you can find calendar listings of what magician is performing where, and that itself provides its kind of history. And that's kind of where we get the information of Soto Tsunetaro, whose career began around 1890, being the first Japanese magician to perform in America. Thing is, this was the state of the history until about 2006, when the Japanese magic historian Matsunabe Matsuyama started looking into this, and what he discovered was that Soto Tsunetaro was actually a guy from New York named Wellington Tobias. He was yellow facing, and that's not too surprising when you look at the picture to us now. But he maintained this masquerade completely successfully for a 20-year career. What's really, really baffling is if you go into the literature, into his obituary in the Sphinx magazine, even that editor does not blow his cover. His name is listed as Soto Tsunetaro. He died. He's survived by his wife. And it's clear if you sort of read between the lines, the articles about him, and in fact, if you look at his correspondence, which Caveney has some of that in his collection, that the magic world and the show business world knew very well this guy was not Japanese, but the magic world at least was keeping his cover. And he was, Tobias was the subject of major press coverage of the time. The Cosmopolitan magazine, not the one we have today, but it was a nationwide arts and culture magazine, listed him as one of the 10 best magicians in America, and also maintained that fiction that he was Japanese. There's a sort of aside in the article. It says something along the lines of, he is unusually tall for a Japanese or something. Again, little hints that people were onto, people knew. Anyone in show business was going to know, but no one blew his cover. So these stories of these two magicians, Namigoro Sumidegawa and Soto Tsunetaro, the fake Japanese magician, sort of spurred me on to create this show, A Box Without a Bottom. By the way, I'm going to pause here for a minute. I'm going to say that I run Zoom performances here for the March. We've done digital performances, and I'm actually really comfortable keeping an eye on chat while I'm doing this. So if questions or comments for me pop up and you want to throw them in chat, by all means do so. I'm happy to sort of answer questions as we go. I was sort of taking a guess as to what you guys would most be interested in. And so I'm going to gloss over certain things, and I'm glad to sort of flesh things out. On the subject of Japanese magic, I just want to refer to a couple of other things that were part of my research, but did not actually become part of my show. If you're interested in the subject, there was a lot of the information I used for my show, and then a lot that I didn't. It was I think it was a 6-part series called An Investigation into the Magic in Japan After the Opening of the Country by Matsunabe Matsuyama. It began in the summer 2006 issue of the JBCR. It's a quarterly journal. It's very scholarly. It's very dense, but it's great reading. I'll give a plug here for the Conjuring Arts Center. They're the ones who published the JBCR. For a pretty small fee, you can get an online membership, which will give you access to the digital editions of this. And in addition, there's just tons of stuff. You can get back issues of the Sphinx, going back to the turn of the century, 1900 and before. Back issues of all kinds of magazines. Jen, I think, is in there. And then the entirety of the Miracle Factory's collection of books is there digitally. So like, say, the House of Mystery or the Cardini book, those are worth the price of admission right there, practically. So the Jabissiere and this series are available digitally through the Conjuring Arts Center. And then a really fun thing was the publication in Genie in 2016 of this 18th century Japanese magic text, Hokasen, which translates to Street Performing Collection. It was published in 1764, and the entirety of it is published in this issue, if you haven't seen it. In it, there is a full description of a Japanese rendition of the cups and balls, their version of the cups and balls, what became known as Oantotama, meaning bowl turning over, because as you can see here, they were done with these bowls and then these kind of spring-loaded balls. So the cups and balls is in there, and also a description of the linking rings, the iron rings. And this, incidentally, is the oldest description of the linking rings in print. They were definitely of Chinese origin, but there is no printed description of the effect older than this one. Modern contributors to Japanese contributors to the art. Of course, there's Tenkai Ishida and Shigeo Takagi. I have both their books, and they're wonderful. And of course, Shimada, fantastic performer, and his daughter Luna, also a fantastic magician. And and of course, Asian and Asian American magicians are just all over the place. I think we're all familiar with Shin Lim or Will Tsai or Jade or Juliana Chen. They're just all over. I had a lot of interesting, not a lot, but a couple of really nice conversations with Max Maven when I was researching my show. And one of the subjects we briefly discussed that I feel should be mentioned is magic's history of yellow facing. Most famously, William Robinson, Chung Ling Soo. I've mentioned Soto Tsunetaro, who beat him by Chung Ling Soo by about 20, 25 years. There was the Bamberg family here, David Bamberg or Fu Manchu, and then Al Wheatley, who popularized the Chop Cup, or as it was known, the Chop Cup, after his faux Asian magician character that he used to play. That's kind of the historical bit about that I wanted to talk about. So it was the discovery of some of this historical stuff and my interest in theater that led me to want to create a theatrical magic show. And when I encountered this story of Namigoro Sumidogawa, again, as close to, the possessor of the first passport to the US, symbolically in a way, symbolic of the first Japanese to come to America. His story, and then Soto Tsunetaro, the so-called first Japanese magician, who in fact was a white man from New York. And then in the show, I explore a possible connection between the two men. I do take poetic license with it. It's clear looking at Wellington Tobias, Soto Tsunetaro's repertoire, that he must have studied Japanese magic pretty carefully. A lot of his magic was Western, but he had clearly studied Japanese magic from somebody. Sumidogawa gave an interview towards the end of his life, around 1890, in which he talks about having taught some Western magicians, and he's not very specific about it. But the timing suggests that Wellington Tobias at least could have been one of them. So I took some poetic license and drew a direct connection between these two men as part of the plot of the show. I'm gonna switch my camera over now and go over to the next then. Okay. And can everyone still hear me okay? Robert, can you give me a...
You're good.
I see you nodding, okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Great. So given these two characters and this notion of this show, one thing that if you go back into back issues of the Sphinx during the time of Soto Tsunetaro, Wellington Tobias's career, he was actually known. There was a product you could buy from magic shops called the Soto Tsunetaro Jap Box. Now, those of you who are old timers know of the prop called the Jap Box. There's an entire chapter devoted to it in Rice's Encyclopedia of Silk Magic. There's an old out of print book called Jap Box Magic by Glenn Gravatt, written in about the 1920s. The prop was quite well known around the turn of the century, going into even into the mid-century. And it's a prop I had heard of. I remember seeing one in a magic shop when I was a kid. I think it must have been a D.H. Robbins model because it was sort of painted red and had a dragon on it kind of thing. That's their model. And it is this prop right here. It's a bottomless box, a box without a bottom, with this tray. Max, in communication with Max Maven, Max told me that the prop would have been known in the 1800s in Japan. First of all, I was surprised to find out that it was authentically Japanese. I really didn't think that was going to be the case, but it is. It was known in Japan in the 19th century, in the 1800s, as a Soko Nashi Bako, box without a bottom, literal translation. By about the 1870s, for some reason, the box became known in Japan. Japanese magicians would have known it as a Nihon Sero. Sero, it referred to a steamer box that you would find in a kitchen. Nihon, meaning of Japan, loosely translated. There was kind of something interesting that happened to Japanese magic in the 1860s and 1870s. At that time, you had a lot of Westerners coming in. The Japanese weren't really going out into the West so much, but in the 1850s and 1860s, a lot of Westerners were coming in, including a lot of magicians or entertainers and a fair number of magicians. And so prior to about 1850, if you had asked a Japanese magician what his art was called, the word was teizuma. Te means hand. Zuma is lightning, lightning hand, sleight of hand, rapid hand. Sometime in the 1860s, 1870s, the term became wazuma. This is another thing Max told me. Wazuma, the wa prefix, again, in this context means of Japan. It seems to have been an effort by the Japanese magicians to separate what they were doing from this stuff that these Western magicians were performing. So this became Nihon Sero. So here was this prop, the Jap box, with which I had kind of I'll call it a hot-cold relationship with as a kid. Honestly, it was I kind of shrugged and rolled my eyes when I heard the name. And then there's kind of a longish shaggy dog story about a friend of mine describing an effect with this that did not exist. It was a college friend of mine I used to do shows with, and he made me really want to get one of these. And then I started developing the show. So it's not a magic lecture unless I teach you a little magic. So this prop is not likely one that you own, but I'm hoping that this effect will be kind of interesting to you. It's the effect that I thought I could do with this box. When I got it, I found I couldn't, so I had to invent a method for it. So this is more or less my own effect with the Soko Nashi Bako. And it was invented to create this effect that I thought my friend John had told me was possible with this box. And so this was my approach to creating this effect. And you know what? I'm gonna have to reboot. I'll add that this method I came up with for this effect makes it one of the most difficult effects that I've ever tried to do. But this was an effect that my friend John, again, he described having one of these boxes, and in conversation, he described this effect of a color changing scarf. Now, some of you may be familiar with the workings of this box. I'm going to take you inside it now. It is, all it really is a box with a couple of panels here that give you two load chambers here in the sides. Again, and the memory I had of my friend John describing it was that it was possible to do this effect where you show the box, you drop the silk, and it comes out the bottom a different color. I assumed that it was because these panels fell in different ways, and they don't. So what I worked out with, after sort of playing with it, I checked the Rice book, and I'm going to move my camera here to give you the bird's eye view of this. After playing with this, and there was reading a Jim Steinmeier effect with a silk cabbie, which was a 20th century silks effect, it kind of gave me the tip off on how the switch might be pulled off. So what this is, this model comes with a rubber band in the sides of the load chamber. And then to that, I've added, this is just a folded in half index card. What I needed was a holder for a bundled silk, something that would allow it to be pulled very easily, that would hold it by friction. So with the card in the under the rubber band, that gives just enough pressure to hold it in place. One of the silks, or several silks, is placed in the load chamber. Shoot, and I just, the folding of this bundle is actually very fussy, and I'm doing kind of the quick version of it. It's one of the hardest things about this effect, so I'm going to do kind of the quick version here. The first production silk is put in the load with a piece of tape there to hold it in place, so that when it opens, so that when I let it open, it's right here where I can clip it with my fingers. So the idea being showing with the audience here this way, showing it empty, and then with the tray in place, bringing it upright and allowing the load chamber to come open. Reaching in, and this is where having that double tape holder is important. I'm able to clip it with my fingers and grab the bundle with my index finger and thumb. Moving that forward, that gets wedged in between the door and the front of the box. The silk is produced, and then for the color change, it's a matter of dropping the silk in, allowing the load door to hold it, and then just pushing up and letting the color change silk drop out. The timing is tricky as hell. And as fun as it was, I think it's one of the most difficult tricks that I've ever tried. But I thought it might be interesting to you just to get a look at the working of the box a little bit. How are the flaps hinged? I'm not really mechanically inclined. I think it might be what you call a pin hinge. There's no outer hinge here. There's some, I think there's like a pin sticking through here and a matching hole here at the bottom. It's a beautifully made prop. They're if you have a copy of Rice, you'll know that the old Thayer models, those must have been beautiful. The Thayer models had the molding here along the top was spring loaded. So if you pressed down on it, that would release the load. And my friend John, who had told me the story about the color change that really didn't exist, owned a Thayer model. Okay, there we go. And I contacted him when I began working on this, and I said, "Did you tell me this effect was possible?" And he said, "No, I never told you that." That's okay. So as I mentioned, Sumi Degawa, he was known in the American press as the butterfly conjurer. And sorry, let me get this slideshow, this next slideshow going. So so Namigoro Sumidegawa was known in the American and the European press as the butterfly conjurer, and the trick itself was actually pretty famous. There were several other Japanese troops that were traveling in competition to Risley's. It became kind of a fashion in show business at the time. So this is a photo from Illustrated London News of a magician named Asakichi from another troupe performing the butterfly trick. And it's fairly well known. This is a diagram of the workings of the effect actually from Tenkai's book, Magic of Tenkai. It's a thread-based routine. Basically what it amounts to, what you see here, is the butterflies are, there's a thread running to them, which in this diagram runs to the performer's ear, and using the fan keeps them aloft. And there's a lot of animation that's possible. You can make it rest on a cup and appear to drink and then take off, and you can manipulate more than one. And it is very, very difficult, I can tell you. When I decided, well, I'll come back to this. So knowing that this was Namigoro's most famous trick, I kind of decided that I had to recreate it in some form for the show. Again, very, very difficult trick. And then because it's thread-based, lighting is a problem. So there was a variation of the butterfly trick that I chose to do that probably would have been done by Namigoro. And I'm going to show you a short, an excerpt from my show where I do it. I'm using this, I'm talking about the opening up of Japan. Commodore Perry has just come to Japan, forced the country to open up, and so the shogun opens up the country, and then I'll take up the story from here via video.
America in 1853, it was a country with muscles to flex and business opportunities to exploit. And having seen how China had gotten carved up by the great powers in the Opium Wars a decade earlier, President Millard Fillmore was anxious that America would get its piece of the action. And so it was that the winds of change that had brought American gunboats to Japan those winds were about to send the Japanese on a journey of their own. So it was a journey to the West and of the West. And that's how it was that in 1866,
so that gives you a sense of what the effect looks like. That was a very brief rendition of it. I had several back and forths with my director about how much we kind of let this go and let the story continue. But that was the method that I found workable for the purpose of the show. I'll say one thing that is very difficult about that effect is that you need a lot of room in which to practice it. I had exactly one room in my house that I could actually practice it in. Again, this trick is authentically Japanese. If you're really interested in it, I strongly suggest you get a hold of Jeff McBride's Butterfly Blizzard DVD, available from your favorite dealer. It is encyclopedic. I will describe the method that I used, but there are one or two details that I got from Jeff's DVD that are sort of proprietary to him. They are either his own, or they were kind of given directly to him by the creators. And so I will be withholding those. What I give you will be enough to actually create the effect, but there are a couple of subtleties he gives that are really nice. And so if you're serious about doing the effect, I strongly suggest you check it out. So it is a thread version. Basically, some of you already know this. It's been in books a lot, but basically the two butterflies are attached by a length of invisible thread here, as my cat watches on. And so the trick with the thread management is the business of cutting the butterflies without cutting the invisible thread. And so this is a method that I came up with on my own. You're going to need some tissue paper, rubber cement, Scotch tape, scissors, and invisible thread. This is just the standard non-elastic invisible thread you buy from the magic shop, and it's wrapped around a playing card when you get it. I've experimented using Vetra thread, some of the strong invisible threads. Those work as well. They're a little more reflective, which is why I don't use them, although I really think they would be fine. But for this method, the regular invisible thread is well protected, and it will take up the strain, and it's a heck of a lot cheaper. So in the end, that's kind of where I went. So the two butterflies are cut from 2 squares of tissue paper, about 3 by 3 inches. And then for the rest of the setup, you'll need a second piece. It's about 6 by 3 inches. And then a smaller strip that's about 1 inch by 3 inches. The 6 by 3 inch and the 1 by 3 inch are used to create a pockets piece of tissue paper. So what you see here is the small piece is just rubber cemented here at the lower corner. This upper end is open. So this forms a little pocket where the butterflies will go. In the context of my show, what I had done is I had just unpacked some things from a box, and they were wrapped, some of them were wrapped with tissue paper as if to cushion them. And so I was taking pieces of tissue paper wrapped around various pieces, and this piece was also included with them. It was just on top. I had crumpled it up. It wasn't as pristine as you're seeing here. Now the 2 3 by 3 inch butterfly squares, they're folded in half. They're doubled and they're folded in half. This is roughly the way they are cut. And this gives me 2 butterfly shaped pieces of tissue paper. Then I cut 2 notches in each of the butterfly, indicated by these lines here. And these form 2 tabs along the spine, the middle of the butterfly. These are folded down, and this gives a kind of slightly stiffer spine along the middle of the butterfly. It's a thread effect. Again, I'm using invisible thread for illustration purposes. This bright orange piece, I would cut them to be about 9, 10 inches, 12 inches long. Hang on a sec. Hi, David. Take it off?
Yeah, bye.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.
See you tomorrow.
Sorry, guys. Like I said, I'm at work. Then the thread is secured at each end. This piece of Scotch tape is about a ½ inch wide and 1 inch long. And the thread is just wrapped around it a couple of times. It's not going to take up a lot of strain, but just enough to keep it in place. And then the 2 pieces of tape, there's a piece of tape at either end, are taped to sort of the spine section of the butterflies. They hold the flaps down. Then I put them side by side, and I start coiling the thread on one of the butterflies. They're side by side. And I coil as much of it as I can on top of one of them and place the second butterfly on top. That sort of sandwiches the bulk of the thread between the two butterflies. Then that's just folded in half to form a packet. And then that packet is placed into the pocket. And then again, in the context of my show, I would crumple this up a little bit so it would match some of the other packing material that I had used in the narrative. I remove that, and then when it comes time to do this, I pick up a quote unquote random, air quotes around random, piece of tissue paper. And then I start by just tearing the pocket square in half along this dotted line into two pieces. Then the pocket piece is put on top facing you. It is folded in half along this dotted line and then rotated up. So now the pocket is facing this way so that the butterflies can be stolen out of the pocket. I've added these orange stripes to help differentiate it a little bit. In the act of repositioning the pocket piece, I just steal out the butterflies and then start cutting away at the pocket square, forming a butterfly-ish thing. No one knows what I'm doing. I'm not explaining it, but everyone has eyes to see. And then I just switch it out. This is just real easy to do as I'm talking. Basically, I just place the fake butterflies on top of the real butterfly packet and sort of gesture with the left hand, and then I just switch it out there. So at this point, the pocket tissue is just crumpled up in the left hand, and the butterflies are unfolded in the right. At this point, the invisible thread is still going to be stuck between the butterflies just because of static. But it's really not going to matter because at this point, all the hard work is really, well, half of the hard work is done. And at this point, then it's just a matter of bringing the fan into place and launching the butterflies. And I, is there, I apologize not being able to perform it live for you in my haste to relocate it myself here. I left my fan at home. But I can tell you that the base that, you know, you do need a fan about as large as the one I was using. Anything smaller than that doesn't give you enough wind. You need to position the butterflies as much over the center as possible, and then give them a good upward shoot. You need a fair amount of ceiling to perform this effect. It's really kind of a stage effect. That's the butterfly effect for you. So I'm just trying to see where we go. Okay. When I talked to Gary about doing this, the butterfly effect and some of the stuff with the Soko Nashibako were what immediately came to mind as things I could teach. The problem being, few if any of you own the Soko Nashibako, and I'm not sure how many of you are going to do the butterfly effect. So I wanted to share two other bits from the show that I think are going to be more along the lines of things that you would use. In the theme of necessity being the mother of invention, there came a point in the show where I just felt that it would be useful to do a third production from the Soko Nashibako. Now, the problem was I already had two effects that I was doing. One, the color change, and then a sort of 20th century silks in reverse effect at the close of the show, which meant that both load chambers were spoken for. So to do a third production, I really wasn't quite sure how to do it. I needed to come up with something. And so I'm going to show you kind of, this is not exactly what I came up with. Well, what I'm going to show you here is an offshoot of what I came up with. And this is nice because this is can be done with a large silk. This is a 24 inch silk. And as you can see, my sleeves are rolled up. And what it is it's a way of doing a vanish of a silk, barehanded, and quite a large one. And then, it also allows for the reproduction of the silk. Like that. That is pretty much the effect. The production of the silk is what I performed in the show. This is a variation of an old prop, which is the handkerchief ball. The variation I came up with that I have yet to find in print is that whereas the ball is usually done with the loop over the opening, this one is effectively upside down with the opening on the bottom. This was inspired in part by what was called the newspaper production gimmick. That's literally what it was called. When I learned it as a kid, in one of my kids' crafty magic books, I learned a version that you made from a matchbox, or the outer part of the matchbox. You would take that part of the matchbox, you would kind of tape a bottom on it, and then some clips on it. So it would be a little container for silk that you would clip on the back of your hand. And the idea here would be that you could show your hand empty, show a newspaper, hold the newspaper, and then with the gimmick on the backside, poke through and produce it through the front. It's not a gimmick that you see very often. So my idea was based on that, and then on a variation that Jim Steinmeier published in Genie. That was an idea of Alan Wakeling's, of using the newspaper gimmick as a production item with an artist's palette instead of a newspaper, having holes in an artist's palette and producing different color silks through the opening. And so in the context of the show, I had the ball where it could be stolen, and then I could show the base. And one nice thing about this prop, in contrast to the newspaper, I was considering the newspaper production gimmick. I just really did not like the fact that the fingers had to be held together like you're back palming a card. You've got to hold it out flat like this. How was I going to steal something that's going to be clipped to the back of my hand? I wasn't too crazy about any of this. So with this version, by stealing it here, it's hidden. Showing this empty, and then being able to just hold it like this. Hand is empty, and then just position actually I was holding it like this. Position this by the hole for the production. And it could just as easily be done. I was doing a show, and it was a kids show, and for the hell of it, I decided to do the newspaper silk production with this gimmick. And I used a number of diamond tip silks diamond silks in this instead, so that I could do different color silks from different parts of the newspaper, and it worked fine. So that's a prop for your consideration. Oh, I'll note the ball itself is made from one of these ear syringe. I'm going to make another one. So just cutting off the syringe part, and you have this nice hollow ball. John Mooring in Magic Magazine published actually a really nice idea for using this kind of ball for a salt pour effect. Cutting off a little bit of the top here, putting the loop so it hangs here, and then a crosswise slit here for salt pour. Squeeze it, comes out, stop and go, and a really large silk load with the added benefit of this hook. It was a really nice idea. So that is what I like to call the upside down handkerchief ball. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to share with you from a trick standpoint is a few subtleties I've come up with the linking rings over the years. So it was really satisfying to me, also a little puzzling in a way, that the biggest reactions magically to my show were, I'd say, the butterflies, and then there was a billiard ball vanish, and then the linking rings. With the linking rings, I think it was a matter of the context of the story. But I think it was one of the few places maybe where I think really that the silent crash link was kind of a useful thing. So I've kind of worked it so that the silent crash link is a thing that I can do. And theatrically, there was something about the way in my show where it was timed, where there's this silence followed by the ring. I think in most cases, I think the crash link is done better with sound. For those of you who might not be familiar with the move, let me just cover all bases. With the crash link, you've got the key ring here. This is the general form. You're holding the gap here towards the bottom of your fist, tapping the ring, and as you're coming down, letting it ride and link. That's all the crash link is. With the silent crash link, it required a certain level of precision to make it a reliable move. So what I've come up with is the fact that my key ring over some years of use, back when I was using it in high school, kind of developed this imperfection. There's one side that's higher than the other. And what I realized at one point was this allows me to know that I'm holding my key ring in the exact same way every time. When I'm grabbing my key ring, I can do this by touch. I know that I always want to have what I'll call this the upper end up when I'm holding it in crash link position. That it allowed a consistent positioning of the key ring. My key is also fairly wide. I would call it medium wide. I've seen openings that are a lot wider. I've seen them narrower. This is kind of medium wide. But by being able to be absolutely consistent this way, I know the position of the ring. If I position my pinky against the end here of the lower end, then I can be absolutely consistent in my grip on the ring, which makes it possible then for me to reliably do, he says as he screws that up, to reliably do a silent crash link. It's a matter, and I know that by coming down, hitting against the heel, what I'm doing is I'm hitting against the heel, following through and coming through for the silent crash link. This has also led me to come up with a variation on an unlink that I first learned from Chris Capart's Stars of Magic linking ring routine. Jeff McBride describes it in his series as the Reinhardt unlinking move. And it's a really pretty unlink. Looks like that. And that was another really strong reaction moment in my show. And it's tricky to do. It's very knacky. I prefer to do it silently. There we go. But it is very knacky. The way it is described in the literature, the way Capart describes it, the way Jeff teaches it, The key ring is here in my right hand. The gap is here. The solid ring is balanced here on the edge of the thumb. And then the key ring is lowered on the fingers as far down as you can get it. What we're taught is to get it as close to the bottom of the ring, and this allows you to aim. I've never been crazy about this. The reason I disliked this when I was learning it is this top ring is just really unstable. It can twist, it can swing, and more to the point, I didn't want to have to set this up where I am just gazing at this like I am taking aim to make the move happen. So my variation, which again, I have not seen in print, although I feel like I saw someone else use this method. It might have been George Tovar. I need to email him and ask. But I've seen this move many times. What I decided was I needed to be sure, I needed to minimize the amount of movement of the solid ring, and I needed to know where that opening was. So by starting by taking the solid ring and placing it here between the fingers onto the knuckles here. First of all, it's a lot more stable. It can rock, but it can't swing. And if I hold my hand still, it's not going to move at all. What this does is it means I know exactly where the ring is. And if I take the key ring and I have the opening between the index and middle fingers, well, that's exactly where that solid ring is when it's in this position. And then I know, because of the way my ring is, that the so-called higher end is here against my index finger. So by touch, I can position the key ring so that that opening is exactly where I need it to be. The solid ring isn't going to move, and it's going to drop. The move is absolutely reliable for me now because of this. It's just a matter of reducing variables and doing things by touch as much as possible. I wanted to just close out. Let me switch cameras back. Oops. Here we go. Just some thoughts on creating a theatrical magic show. And God knows I'm not an expert. I've been working in theater for a long time. I've worked, this is the third theatrical magic show I've done, but really kind of the first one where I sort of went all in. So, it was a matter of coming up with the story and balancing the story with the magic. The magic had to be adaptable as much as possible. The effects, my approach was to try and use the tricks as metaphor and visual counterpoint as much as possible, to build the effects into the story as much as possible. But they also had to be central. So there was a lot of strange give and take. So creatively, it's really hard to describe that process. From a production standpoint, from making it happen, some harsh realities. When you're performing publicly for ticket sales, it's really hard to make money. Very, very, very difficult. And there is the matter of developing the show. For me, the fringe circuit was really important. Testing this out at San Diego Fringe was really important. I'm grateful to Christian Cadrigal and Jay Alexander for letting me do a run of a later version of Fog City Magic. And that was all an opportunity to develop the show. I used Works in Progress series here in the Bay Area. There's a reason I worked for the Marsh. I became involved with the Marsh as an artist way back in the 90s. I kind of made myself useful from a production end, so I work here. But this relationship meant that I knew I had a relationship with a producer who would get their phone calls answered by the press. I knew that as a producer, it was a good fit for me in that way. That was one relationship I've cultivated, and it's based on mutual respect, and all kinds of other good things. But there's a certain amount of motivated self-interest on my part. I mean, I'm not ashamed of that. Gigi is asking, how much did the show change from your earliest idea to the finished performance? If anything big was added or removed, what was it? The answer is a lot. A lot changed. This is actually, I'm going to veer a little bit away from your question, Gigi, but come right back to it. So I'm guessing that most of you are aware of the controversy around the show. That my original concept with this, I liked the idea of this object, the Jap box, and its title and sort of what it meant and how it resonated. And I kind of thought, and its relationship to, while Namigoro Sumi Degawa almost certainly knew of the trick and how it was performed, the evidence seems to be that he did not actually perform it as part of that American tour. Soto Tsunetaro, Wellington Tobias, had this prop associated with him, the Jap box, and the irony of this white American masquerading as Japanese and then making famous this trick, the Soto Tsunetaro Jap box, was something I wanted to run with. So I thought it might make a good title for the show. Artistically, it felt right to me. I ran it past my parents, my family, some Japanese American friends. I tested the show at the San Diego Fringe. Japanese American audiences were some of my biggest fans there. It had the run at Fog City under that name. It opened at the Marsh, and the controversy blew up. And in short, what I decided was that no group is entirely homogeneous, and that there is an important subset of the Japanese American population, most of them of the age of the internment, for whom this is just too much of a trigger, where the word, even in artistic context, is just too much of a trigger. And as these people are, in my metaphorical village, my elders, I felt that I needed to back off and change the name. And so the name change came. So that's one change, but that's not exactly what you were asking, Gigi. My original search was to create a theatrical magic show, a piece of theater that told a story that had magic in it. My original concept was actually to tell a history of America through magic. And I had a pretty good feeling that I wasn't going to stick with that, but I needed some place to start. Gigi, as a writer, you've got to know so much the importance of starting and how hard that is. And what you've got to do is you've got to start and you've got to work on something. And if you're going to change it, fine, but you've got to start, even if the idea is half-baked or even crappy. One of my favorite stories of creativity that I keep in my mind always, was from Stephen King. You may be familiar with his novel, The Stand, this 800-page monstrosity about this plague that wipes out 99% of the world's population, and then this demon who kind of comes to reap souls, and then this woman who's presumably a messenger from God who's on the side of good, and the conflict that ensues. It's like 850 pages long in its original form. I read it in high school. It's the longest thing I'd ever read in high school, and I loved it at the time. But that's what the book is about. But King tells this pretty funny story about how he had set out to write a book based on the experience of Patty Hearst. It was kind of his imagining of what her experience was. He thought, this is going to be my next novel. He even had a title for it. I can't remember what it was. It was something like the the house on Clover Street or something like that. But it was going to be about Patty Hearst and this sort of fictionalized account of that. And he tells the story in his book Dance Macabre, how he would sit down at the typewriter and he'd start working and he'd get nowhere. And he tried everything, and he tried various angles, different narrators. He tried this, he tried that, and he was just miserable. And then one day he was sitting at his typewriter and his mind was blank, and there was this sort of fire and brimstone preacher on the radio. And so he just, started typing this thing that became this story about a plague and a demon, and it had nothing to do with what he started. And this was like this. So the original version of this was called American Wizards. I was going to tell the history of America through magic. Harry Houdini was going to be about the immigrant experience. Charles Carter about the growth of American business and internationalism. P.T. Selbit, although not American, but about P.T. Selbit and Horace Golden, and sawing a woman in half as mirroring the suffrage movement, the women's suffrage movement at the time. And then I particularly wanted to talk about Richard Potter, the first American professional magician, who was a black man. He was son of slaves. And thank you, Gary, for the house on Value Street. Yes. So it started with this kind of historical sense, but then morphed into this. So a bunch of tricks got thrown away. And then starting with the story of Namigoro Sumidogawa and Soto Tsunetaro, I was working through that. And I began working with my director, Mark Kenward, and also with a number of other performers who we would give feedback on stuff. And one thing I kept hearing in our rehearsal groups was, well, that's nice, David. It's a little TED talky, meaning maybe a little too historical, not personal enough. And Mark was kind of the guy who twisted my arm, who made me put in my personal story, interweaving it with my history as a magician, as a Japanese American, and weaving that throughout. Personally, I feel that the end product was not nearly as tight as I would have liked. I'm really glad for the experiment. Audience members clearly responded well to it. I'm fairly dissatisfied artistically with the result, although it was a thrilling adventure, as we say. So anyway, now so Gigi, I hope that answers your question. And if it didn't, I'll circle around. Christian said, he's saying, regarding tricks in their names, the Chop Cup has a racially dicey past. What are your feelings of continued use of the name? A new name, maybe the Wheatley Cup. My initial reaction is, personally, I'm okay with Chop Cup. I feel that's kind of, Chop Cup would get on my nerves, but I feel like we've made that change. And it's, yes, it's connected to, this character of questionable taste. But it is, I at least feel it is the nature of language that words move, words and phrases often move very far from their original meanings. So, for instance, the phrase beyond the pale. We say something is beyond the pale. Kind of has a gruesome origin. It refers to, I can't remember what country or region in the Middle Ages, where you would have certain unwanted populations in a village or city who are kept outside of the main area of civilization by these fences with these sharp points on them. If you tried to climb them, you would get impaled. And so there was the original phrase had something to do with this barrier on which one might be impaled. And then there were those who were in the eventual version of the phrase beyond the pale. When we say that phrase, we have no relation to people getting impaled or this particular sense of exclusion that the phrase originally meant. Granted, you got to go all the way back to the Middle Ages for that, that connection. And so I feel that language can move beyond these things. And so for me personally, at least, the chop cup specifically, I'm okay with. If we want to go with the Wheatley cup, that actually probably has value to give credit to Al Wheatley, who did not invent the chop cup, but he developed it into a form that was usable. Don Allen was really the guy who put the chop cup on the map. There's a pretty well-known story. When Don Allen performed the chop cup on Ed Sullivan, actually he sort of ticked off magic dealers across the country a little bit, because the Al Wheatley model, which Don Allen was using, was shorter. Its proportions were a little smaller than the standard chop cup that you would usually get. The Al Wheatley model was a little different. It fit the load a little better. And then, of course, that was the one that I saw on television. So you had magicians ordering this prop. They said, "Oh, it's a chop cup. I'll order it." And and then they would say to the dealer, "No, I want the one I saw on television." And so years after Al Wheatley died, Don Allen was at a party, and Charlene, Al Wheatley's widow, walked in, and she saw Don Allen there, and she said, "You're the guy who made us all that money." Because Don Allen made the chop cup a thing every magician wanted, and his routine is it's a masterpiece. So maybe we go with the Wheatley cup to give Wheatley his credit. But anyway, long answer to your question. But sometimes it's right to do this. One thing Max told me when I asked him about the history of the Soko Nashibako, the Jap box, he told me that sometime in the 80s, Bill Larson made the editorial decision to no longer use the term. It just, and it started to vanish from the language there. And that's one thing I actually meant to mention when I talked about some of the yellow facing characters in magic, is that I find it very reassuring that magic has kind of, by and large, seen the writing on the wall and sort of dropped that sort of characterization, has done not too badly at sort of putting this stuff aside. The Chinese laundry ticket, I'm not sure exactly, it's not completely gone, but it's a lot. It was all over the place when I was a kid. And the drawings of the bucktooth Asians and the guys in the coolie hats and all of those stereotype characterizations, they're largely gone. There are some things that are still holding on, that we could, whether the chop cup is one or I saw a discussion online about, faux Asian coins and faux Asian props. I kind of dryly note in my show, I show the Grant's Chinese temple screen, which was a prop I loved as a kid. But if it's got the Buddha on one side and sort of faux Chinese characters on the other, and it's a kind of WTF moment if you're paying attention. And then the characters, I paid for a translation. I found someone who could translate Chinese. And I said, what does this mean? He says, you know, probably nothing, but if as close as it gets to real language, it means smoking is allowed in this establishment. So, you know, so we've moved away from a lot of this. Now, Craig, I don't actually know that Steve Martin gag. I wonder, you know, the idea of oh, okay, still selling the laundry ticket. Okay. You know, I remember as a kid, I guess I take some comfort from the fact that there was a very popular version of the Chinese laundry ticket sold when I was a kid. I kept seeing it in Magic magazines. And it was marketed under a line from the presentation, no ticky, no shirty. That's gone. I went looking for that. So thankfully, you know, we move on. We have moved on a lot. We want to be mindful of this. I mean, I fell in that trap myself. I did. This is okay. You know, that's a good gag, Craig. I think that really gets at kind of this idea of the faux Orientalism in magic, which was just part of the landscape of the Victorian era, certainly, and then going into the nightclub era and even beyond that. It was trying to add some mystery, and it was this the stereotypes were built into the country, and you know, the Risley troupe and Namigoro Sumigawa fit into that. It was wow, it was from the Mystic East, you know, that was a thing. But we do want to move beyond that, and you know, for me, it's been cool to see Shin Lim or Will Tsai on national television, and kind of being guys who happen to be Asian who are doing like blow your head off magic. I think that's a pretty cool place to be right now. So, you know, really right now, I don't know, I may have gone on too long. I don't know if you guys got questions or if we just want to move on to something else, because I think I've kind of spouted my bit. So thanks for the soapbox. Thanks for the use of the hall, everybody.
Things are set up so that if anyone wants to unmute themselves to ask a question verbally, make a comment, share something, you can do that. Unmute yourself and share whatever you want to share.
Take the spotlight out. Okay. Oh, thanks for that. Oh, we got a real Chinese historian here.
Thought I had it set up. Maybe I didn't. Let me check. I thought I had it set up for unmuting. Whoops, there we go.
I'm gonna kind of also sort of
yes, it is. Okay. All right, you can unmute now. Have a go.
So David, I just the link that we talked about, I just put in there. There's an hour-long piece with David talking about the development of the show with clips from the show that we decided not to put up until after the lecture, but so the link is there now. For all of you that may or may not know, you can save the chats so you can have all the links and the conversations by going to the very bottom and see the three little, and if you just click on that, you can click save chat at the end of the evening, you'll get a document with all of that information in it. So that's good. Thank you, David. It's just fascinating. It's not kind of nonstop fascinating with the new things. As I was researching the newsletter, I kept learning things. I hope I was accurate with most of it. But the Chinese laundry ticket, John Owens was telling me some really interesting stories about that, because it actually was done by Chung-Ling Fu as a torn and restored paper effect. And then Harlan Tarbell was fascinated by it, and he tried to figure out how it was done. And when he did figure it out, it was during the wartime when the paper was really thin. So he put Chinese lettering on it so that it would obscure the fake, the other ball. and that sort of stuck, and then it became commercially released that way. And there are dealers that are still selling it, and I put a link to sort of a Google search that just shows you some of the old ones and some of the new ones that you can still get, amazingly.
I want to throw in a thing here, because again about the Conjuring Arts Center and the Ask Alexander subscription. I think it's like $10 a month, which gets you really extensive access, which was a ton of fun for researching. Because if you read about the original Qingling Fu torn and restored paper, it is mind-boggling, because he would use a long paper strip, I think about 8 feet long and about 2 inches wide. And he would, show his hands empty, and he would tear that thing up and then wad it up into a ball, and then boom, it's restored. And then he would show his hands empty again, tear it up again, boom, restore it. Show his hands empty again, tear it up again, restore it again. And he would just do it 3, 4, 5 times. And no one's really quite sure how he did it. David Bamberg in the Miracle Factory book, House of Mystery, offers a really nice possible explanation. But reading that, I just went, head explodes. Anyway, okay, I see Gigi saying bye. Good seeing you, Gigi. Looking forward to the new book. So anyway, yeah, that's and Qingling Fu actually, Kristen Moon, who wrote that paper about the paper butterflies, wrote another paper when Qingling Fu was partly responsible for this pretty large change in American immigration law, because he came over from not the Columbian Exposition, but one of the expositions around in the 1890s, and he was performing. And because of the anti-Asian immigration laws at the time, he was required to leave as soon as his gig was done. But people loved him so much, he got rebooked. And one of his bookers was Oscar Hammerstein, the grandfather of the famous composer, musical theater writer, hired him. But Qingling Fu got kind of burned or something, was going to get deported. They went to court, and it basically formed this part of American immigration law that I think is still in various forms on the books, which basically allows for people with particular skills to be let in on particular visas. The Beatles actually came to America in the 60s on one of these visas. One of the provisos is you can come in, you can do your gig as long as no American citizens of similar skill are available to do your job. Almost exactly that wording. And so Qingling Fu was behind that bit of immigration law. And now I'm really going to shut up because I think you guys probably are going to show tricks and stuff.
Yeah, I think Dan Chan wants to do something. Dan, are you there? Unmute.
Yes, I am.
Dan, we'd be glad to have you do something. Please do.
Okay, awesome. Give me one moment to get this working. Can you make me a co-host?
I certainly can, Dan.
Perfect.
There you go.
Okay, so this is a work in progress, and I'm going to share with you a video before we start this effect.
Dan, before you start that, do you want this not to be recorded?
Yes, please.
You want not to be recorded, Dan?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I'll stop the recording now then.
Okay.